don't you have to?
Yeah. Oh yeah, it says that. Yep.
So perfect. Okay. So do you want to just tell me a wee bit about your experience of beginning a therapeutic relationship with a client with ASD?
Keeping it to counselling psychology clients?
Yeah, keeping it in a counselling psychology context.
So I've worked with, since I qualified, I've worked with 3 adult clients as a counselling psychologist, and all 3 have been, actually one thought they were probably Asperger's but hadn't got a diagnosis, and the other 2 had diagnoses. So I'm just thinking back to, I'd say with all 3, beginning a therapeutic relationship was really easy. So I'm trying to kind of put my finger on anything that I might have done differently with them than I would have done with someone who wasn't on the spectrum. Yeah. I know as we talk more,
yeah, things will come up.
We'll come up with more things.
Is there anything you find to be like particularly helpful when you're kind of building rapport, or kind of unhelpful?
I guess one thing that I do, that I kind of would probably do with anyone now. I only really work with adults with Asperger's these days. That's kind of all I do. Although all of my training wasn't that. The whole training, all of the 450 whatever hours was, no one ever had autism. So, I would say that I'm very clear, and I try to be very upfront about what's happening.
Yeah.
So, like, for example, if I thought that there was a moment where working with some possible transference would be of use, I would explain what that was about. So, for example, if someone asked me if I was religious, and I thought, well, there might be something interesting here in what, before I tell you that, there's an ambiguity. You don't know the answer to that. So you're going to go through some ideas about what it means if I am or if I'm not, what that means to you. Before I answer that question, we can learn loads about why you asked it, from what your reactions are of like, oh, I hope she is, I hope she isn't, whatever. So rather than some therapists might kind of say, oh, well, what does it mean to you, and not sort of show the working.
Yeah, so being quite explicit with why you're interested in it.
Yeah. So that, roughly what I've just said to you of just explaining, okay, I will answer that, but I'm not going to answer it yet, and this is why. I would quite often do that kind of thing of just like, I don't see the benefit of me knowing things that the client doesn't know. I think maybe particularly for people with Asperger's who are less comfortable in those grey areas of not really knowing what the rule is and what's expected of them, adding a whole load more on that, like just suddenly being silent and not saying, by the way, some people find it helpful if we're silent for a little while because it helps you process, but if it's not helpful, just tell me. So yeah, I find that helps a lot, and people say that is useful for them, just to kind of have it discussed of, this is what's happening now that I think might be useful, but you might not find it useful, and if you don't, then that's okay. Not everything is useful for everyone. So yeah, just having more of a hopefully collaborative upfront dialogue back and forth, so that that I'm not dictating too much, or I'm just not freaking people out, I guess, to
There's
be non-technical.
Kind of, unspoken assumption that you're waiting for them to do something.
Yeah. So they're not completely left thinking, I don't know how I mess this up. I don't know how I do this right. She's just looking at me and I don't know what I meant to do. Yeah. So that would be.
Yeah. Is that slightly different from how you would normally kind of broach that if you were working with an individual that didn't have a diagnosis?
Well, yeah, it's interesting because I never used to have those conversations like that with people, actually. When I was training, I would never spell it out so much. Mm-hmm. Now that I specialize in working with people with Asperger's, the more that I do that, the more I think, actually, if I had someone who wasn't Aspie, maybe I would do that anyway. I kind of think that's useful to do. So it's not necessarily a difference, but it's kind of a thing that I've learned from those clients, I suppose, that maybe now actually I would take back into other work.
Yeah, it's kind of influenced your style of working.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you find that can be kind of unhelpful when starting off meeting someone for the first time? Or is it largely that kind of making sure things are quite transparent and quite kind of clear?
Yeah, and I guess I might think of unhelpful things. But I was just thinking about, I did, my thesis, was on the experiences of people with autism in counselling. So quite a lot of what I do in the room is influenced by what those adults that I interviewed told me they'd found helpful and hadn't found helpful.
Yeah.
And one of the things that really came across from a lot of those guys was not wanting that slightly odd, distanced, barriered, robotic kind of therapist thing. That if their therapists or their psychologists or whatever had kind of shown a little bit of humanity and a bit of humour or a bit of connection, that had made a massive difference to them, and then they'd felt like, oh, okay, I can trust this person. I feel more comfortable here now. So that certainly is something that I try and do. I guess in terms of if there is some humour, whatever, I don't mind there being humour in the therapy room. Which some people might. They might think, well, actually, we're all employing our humour as defences now, and maybe we should look at that. But I think that people find that useful, that I've worked with that. Just a bit of lightness, sometimes, not always. Because obviously you're doing some work and sometimes you need to go to difficult places, but to be able to have a bit of lightness, people seem to find that helpful. On a similar kind of theme, people were talking in my research about that kind of humanness, and little bits of self-disclosure, which they found kind of just humanizing and made them able to relax a bit. So if I wouldn't necessarily go kind of straight in with it, but if someone had said something to me about a computer game that they played and I knew what that computer game was, particularly if it was a first session, I might kind of say, oh yeah, okay, I know that one. And it kind of makes them feel like I get their frame of reference a bit.
Okay, yeah, so showing you've got a bit of human, like there's a person behind the therapist, and
that actually there might be little kind of ways that we could connect on some things. it's just about building that trust, I think, and building a bit of trust and a bit of rapport